everyone, it's Lisa here with you today. I hope that you are all well. Today I'm going to be doing a card for you using the Paper Hugs stamp set. Such a pretty set, and I'm going to be pairing it with a Craft Around Meraki Paradise cover plate. So let's get started with the card. I've popped a panel of cardstock into my MISTI. I'm using Strathmore Bristol Smooth today. Archie's Cold Press is also really good for Karin Markers. So I'm prepping my cardstock with an anti-static powder bag, and I'm going to stamp the image down using Versamark ink because we're going to be doing some heat embossing. Making sure to press everything down really well so that I don't miss any of those areas in the middle of the stamp, as it is quite detailed. And just adding my gold embossing powder now over the top, knocking off any excess after I've applied it all. And I also take a dry brush and I just take off any stray bits of powder that I can see around the image. And I'm only actually using 6 colours on my card today, and I'm going to start off by doing some of the leaves. And for the first set of leaves I use the grass green marker. I will have all the colours listed in the supplies list below, but I will talk you through them as much as possible as we go through the colouring. So I'm starting off, as I mentioned, with grass green, and I'm just adding a tiny little bit into each of the bottom sections of those leaves. Now at the moment I've got the colouring in real time, so you can see how little I'm actually adding into each of those leaves. And as I say, I don't use this colour on all of the leaves, so I'm just picking out those that look really similar, and I'm adding a tiny little bit into each of them. And now I'm going in with a water brush. I use a fine water brush on most of my watercolouring. Sometimes I use a paintbrush, but for some reason whenever I use markers I prefer to use a water brush. Whenever I use watercolour paint which is in pans, I tend to use a normal brush, so I don't know why. I guess it's just the habits that we get into. I'm just continuing to add bits of tiny little dabs of the green into the leaves, and I have sped the footage up a bit now so that you don't have to watch all of this in real time. It probably took me only about 20 minutes to colour this image, so not long at all, but as we move through the colouring I will speed it up a little bit more just so that this video isn't too long. At the moment, all I'm really trying to do is add in my first layer of colour. I do go back in and add other layers as we move through, just to give some more interest and dimension to some of the flowers. But at this stage, I just want to get the colour down and just start to sort of bring that image to life. Okay, so we're going to move on to our largest flower now that I've done the first layer of green on some of those leaves, and I'm using Cerise here. So again, I'm just putting a tiny little dab into some of the sections of those petals, and then I'm blending it out with the water brush. And I do sort of tap off to the side. You can see I've got a paper towel there. So all I'm doing there is enabling myself to just blend that out to a really pale pink towards the edge of each section. Now there's a couple of ways that you can add your colour onto your panel. You can do it directly with the marker, as I'm doing here and as I've done earlier in the video, or you can also scribble some onto an acrylic block and you can just dab the tip of your water brush into that and then bring that to the paper. Sometimes when you use the marker directly onto the panel, you can put a little bit too much down. I think that you can control the amount a bit better if you add it onto a block and then bring it onto the paper that way. So I've just finished colouring, or the first layer of my colouring of the smaller flowers, and for that I used violet blue, and I'm now doing the berries in lilac. And you can really see the image coming to life now as you add the colour down onto the panels. So I'm going in now with Lush green, and I'm doing the remainder of the leaves. The Lush green is actually a very blue green, really pretty colour, and it really makes a nice contrast to the grass green. So rather than having all of my leaves exactly the same, I've chosen to use two colours. And I'm now going to move in now with Magenta red, and I'm just going to finish colouring or doing the first layer of colouring on the remaining flowers. And it's already starting to look really pretty. It's such a gorgeous image anyway, but what I'm now going to do is add a little bit more colour into some of the areas just to give a bit of depth and a bit more interest to some of those petals. So I'm using Cerise again on my largest flower, and I'm now going in with the violet blue on the other smaller flowers. So just adding little bits either direct with the marker or I pick them up from the acrylic block. As I was watercolouring this, I was thinking about what level you might need to be to colour this image, and I really think it works well whatever stage you're at. If you're a beginner, the areas are not that big, you don't have to worry about really good blending. You can use a relatively limited colour palette and you'll get a beautiful outcome. And I think if you're a bit more advanced, it also works really well if you were to do the no line colouring technique, for instance. We're going to move on now to die cutting the image out. I did actually take my heat gun to the image and make sure it was completely dry before I placed the die down on top. I didn't want to get any smudging either as I put the die down or as I ran it through the machine. So just removing the tape now, and I'm going to set that down to one side whilst we work on our background. Okay, so we're going to move on to our background now, and I'm going to do some dry embossing using the Craft Around cover plate die. So I've just taped that down to some Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'm going to show you the sandwich that I used with this Sizzix Big Shot. So actually in the instructions it tells you to use tab 1, but I found you needed to use tab 2. With tab 1 I did actually cut through the paper a little bit, so I changed to tab 2 so there would be less pressure. So what I'm doing now is I'm just laying my first plate down, and I'm going to add the silicone or rubber mat down on top. That's what's going to stop or prevent the die from actually cutting into the cardstock. Now I'm going to place that down. So I've got the cardstock, then the die, and then I'm going to add another plate on top before I run it through. You may need to play around a bit with your own machine and the sandwich that you use. You may need to decrease or increase the pressure to get the end result. So I'm just going to take the tape off now and tilt it into the light so you can see how pretty the embossing is. Very different to the die cutting, but it really adds such a lovely subtle interest. Just adding some glue onto the back of that panel now, and I'm going to add that to a top folding A2 pink note card. Now here I've got the card that I made yesterday when I was prepping for the video, and I really wasn't 100% happy with it. So I thought I would change it up a little bit today. I thought that my sentiment covered too much of that pink flower. So what I decided to do today was just add it at a different angle, and I really think it makes a big difference to the end result. I'm just deciding here exactly where to place that down. So I've removed the backing from the foam tape, and I've heat embossed a sentiment from the Paper Hug set. So that is the With Love sentiment. I've put some foam tape onto the back, and I've added a double layer where it overhangs the edge of that envelope. So As I say, I think it makes a big difference. You can now see more of the image, and I think the card in general just looks a little bit more interesting than the one I did previously. And of course I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle to finish the card off, so I'm adding some Enchanted Forest gems on. They're so pretty, they're gold and they're sparkly, and they tie in beautifully with the gold embossing. So I'm trying to decide where and how many I need. It's always a struggle to do that for me, and I do end up adding another one in the top right. But that brings us to the end of today's card. I hope that you enjoyed seeing that come together. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will be back again next week with another card for you. Bye for now.